A Legislative Council special on Perspective this week with Dawn Kinnish presenting her case to become one of our representatives in LegCo. And in a programme of two halves, we also have young pretender Conor Keenan, who's trying for a second time to win a LegCo place. We'll begin with Dawn Kinnish, who's making her first attempt at the LegCo election. I began by asking Dawn to tell us a little bit about her background.
Certainly. I'm not Manx born. I was born in Leicestershire and I came to the Isle of Man in 1997. However, I'd been coming to the Isle of Man since 1979. I'm the daughter of a TT racer and TT winner, so spent quite a lot of time in that period for the racing. But in 1997, I'd been spending quite a lot of time coming to and from the Isle of Man in the few years leading up to that. And a very good friend said, Dawn, why don't you think about coming to the Isle of Man? You spend more time here than you realise. And I thought, well, I've just finished my law degree. I've just finished my solicitor's finals. Let's give it a try. So I came, I immediately settled and I started work with a trust company. And I did a few years for them. Then I went to work for a company, big accountancy company, doing insolvency work. And then 3 years into that, I started to review whether I should continue or finish, actually, my legal training. So I only needed to do another 2 years, my articles. I literally stepped out of the door on Athol Street and next door into the next door building, completed my articles there. And then I was called to the Manx Bar as an advocate in 2005. I then practiced for a few years across different areas of law. But then in fact, towards the end of my articles, I had my first child. I then went on to have a large family in a very short time. So I had 4 children under the age of 4 at one time. So I decided to take a career break, which was the right thing to do. It was a fulfilling period for me. But actually, during that time, I also joined the Health Services Consultative Committee. So I undertook my very first scrutiny role, looking at the healthcare system. When my youngest 2 are twins, when they were just looking at starting school, I looked at a job as a law lecturer for the college on their degree programmes. So I went along initially as a part-time sessional lecturer, and that was a good dip your toe in the water and just see if you like it. I really enjoyed it. They had a full-time post coming up, and then very quickly I was appointed to that post as a full-time law lecturer. That then meant I went on and did my teaching qualifications, so I have a dual professionalism. And I undertook that role for about 4 years, delivering right across different types of law. And I remember some of my colleagues actually from the firm I used to work for said, you never really know a subject until you have to teach it. And absolutely right. I left that role to take a job in the Cabinet Office as the Government Equality Advisor. And one of the reasons for doing that, I love teaching, I love being with the students, but one of the subjects that I taught was equality legislation. And as I delivered that equality legislation training, it was at a time when we didn't have that legislation here on the island. The bill was going through the branches. So the students and I were following that through the branches, quite interested in the processes. And then suddenly an advert was there. It was asking for the Equality Advisor to implement that Equality Act, and it needed somebody who knew about that legislation. So I felt that role for me actually fulfilled both my legal expertise as well as teaching practice, delivering presentations, speaking to people, engaging with people. So that role was for 3 years. I implemented the Act, associated regulations, and drafted the necessary codes of practice during that period. Actually, what that role, it allowed me to engage right across government, across all the different departments. So when you think about working in silos, actually that didn't happen. It was about bringing people together, cross-engagement, but it also exposed me to the political interface very, very closely. So bringing things through Tim Ward processes, Council of Ministers processes, helping with ministerial questions. So it gave a real insight into the political process. I then finished that role because that was a limited term contract, and then started a consultancy. So I offer equality advice, accessibility advice at the moment on a consultancy basis. as well as a volunteer director for Isle of Pride, which I've done for the last couple of years, delivering the island's 2 Pride festivals, working as part of a team. And then I'm also involved in the Garth Road Safety working partnership as a parent representative. And finally, I'm a voluntary secretary for our local sailing club down in Laxey.
Gosh. And your experience with government didn't make you think, oh, I should run a mile from this?
No, not at all. My experience of government is a very positive one. I think you find that there is a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of energy, a lot of willingness for change. So I didn't feel a negative experience at all, but I really enjoyed that engagement across government. So no, actually it had the opposite effect for me, where it ignited that interest further to really understand how that political interface interacted with government and how to bring about change.
We hear a lot in discussions about the Legislative Council about, some people favour the idea that we need more lawyers in Legislative Council, that we need people who know how law works to be able to do the scrutiny properly. I'm guessing that you wouldn't necessarily argue wholly against that, but what is your view on that?
My view is that we should have representation, a diverse representation. So yes, I do bring a legal skill set to that role. What that allows me to do is to hit the ground running effectively. So I understand how laws are developed, I understand the drafting, understand the interpretation, I understand the differences between primary, secondary regulations. So I understand all of the process. So it does give me an added skill set. But I think it's quite right not to have 8 lawyers sitting around the table. I think it's better to have that diverse range of input. But equally, it allows an additional lens to be looked through when you're sharing those ideas, when you're debating those ideas. And it does allow you to pick up things that other people may not pick up, but also share those skills. And that's what I would expect from everybody around the table when you're all bringing something different, is to share those skills. So I don't think it is essential to come to this role as a lawyer, but I do think it just brings a valued skill set to allow you to develop that role into that role very quickly.
And having tried to get my head round what it is that Keys members think Legislative Council should be, and failed miserably, it's fair to say. What do you think the core role of being a member of the Legislative Council is?
The chamber is a revising chamber, so it's about scrutiny of the legislation. I think the best analogy that I would give to this is if you were going to court or to tribunal and you had your case heard by a number of people and they all gave their view and there was an outcome from that hearing and you didn't agree with that view, or you felt that something was overlooked or had been missed, then you would expect an appeal process. So I almost see that as the analogy. It's you will have something delivered at one level and then there's a revising scrutiny challenge role at a different level. So that's how I see Legislative Council. It's just that second layer of scrutiny, of checks, of governance, of challenge, to make sure that what is being delivered is fit for purpose and matches those intended policy outcomes.
And of course, that's all well and good in terms of the Legislative Council chamber and the business in LegCo. But clearly you also sit as a member of Tynwald. Some would say that you're that there are 9 votes in LegCo, 24 in Keys, so your vote actually counts for quite a bit more, because effectively, on an initial vote, LegCo can defeat Keys in Tynwald.
That's right, yes. And being a member of Tynwald, it's important. It's a debating chamber. It's important to be able to bring evidence-based argument into that chamber so that people can hear different perspectives, and from hearing those different perspectives can then take a vote on that. And
I suppose the other obvious question that I would ask is what actually motivates you to want to be a member of the Legislative Council?
I think it's because I'm always passionate about change. I'm very easy to sit and criticise if I think things should be changed. So why not put yourself out there to bring about that change, to be part of that process, to develop that change. I do recognise that the Island Plan has a huge legislative programme. There's a significant amount of legislation that needs to be brought through. So the Legislative Council are going to be very busy in looking at that legislation. But that's what I'm passionate about. I'm passionate about bringing that change, making sure that it's fit for purpose for our society, and making sure that it fits those policy outcomes. And those policy outcomes should be from proper engagement and consultation with our society.
And politically, I mean, I've asked a number of candidates, and some have been more open in terms of their answers than others. What drives you politically? What issues make you angry or happy, perhaps?
Well, I think because I've implemented the Equality Act. I work in the field of equality now. Inequality is what drives me. So I think bringing that skill set, that insight, that understanding of the Equality Act, it was a huge piece of legislation. It is a complex piece of legislation. Is understanding different perspectives and how they are impacted. So inequality is huge, whether it's across education, whether it's across healthcare. It impacts right across all pieces of legislation. So that's the part where I would want to drive change. So I would want to make sure that in the pre-policy process and in the bill development process, that the public sector equality duty has been complied with. And what that means is looking at different people's needs, making sure that we are meeting those people's needs by applying the equality duty, and then that should then deliver better outcomes. So inequality is the bit that really does set the fire alight in my belly, yeah.
And you've already described in this interview that you are quite active in the community in which you live, in the sort of the northeast of the island. Should a member of your community come to you with a problem, what would you do?
I think the important thing is to understand initially the issues. It may be that the issues that are brought to you are not within your skill set, your knowledge. The most important thing is to signpost that individual to the right place. So you definitely cannot go in with the idea that you can fix everything. I think you'd very quickly become overwhelmed. So it's about signposting that person to get the proper support. I mean, if they come to you and you think that this is a legislative need, and this is something that happens quite a lot, is people come to me for advice, particularly where there's been an inequality, particularly connected to disability. They don't know which direction they're going in. They don't know where the laws are. So it's about signposting people to that. And I see that as a continued role, should I be successful.
I suppose one of the reasons I asked that question was because there does seem to be a view amongst some Keys members and LegCo members that there are members for particular areas in LegCo. This has never been the case in the past. Is that a good thing or a bad thing, do you think?
Well, I think you can never be the master of everything. So I think it's always important to recognise the knowledge, experience, the skill set any individual who's involved in politics brings to that role. And it's about, as I said earlier, right at the outset of this interview, it's about sharing those skills and knowledge sometimes. But at the same time, it's about engaging with those people and putting people with those right skill sets. So yes, you will be applying your skills across a whole range of different legislation. There will be some things where my strengths are there. There will be other areas where other members would have particular strengths. So I think that's where teamwork is really important, is to bring together everybody's skill sets and make the most of those skill sets. And again, that brings back to the point about the diversity of membership. Having that diversity of membership always brings a different perspective and a different lens.
Okay, I'll try and ask the question one more time in a slightly different way. Would you be a representative for the Laxey, Lonnon, Maccled area if you were elected to the Legislative Council?
I think you're a representative for the whole island, not just the area in which you live. You are clearly more visible in the area in which you live, but I don't think that you should apply yourself uniquely to that area. You are representing the whole island and trying to engage widely to represent those different perspectives and views.
Moving to a different area then, only 24 of the people potentially listening to this programme actually have a vote with regards to the Legislative Council. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
I think the system is the system. I think I have picked up various views along the way during this engagement process. Whether the system should remain as it is, it's not really for me to say. Whether it should be reviewed, I don't think we should ever be static about things. I think we should always reflect on what is working, what is not working. Should the system be changed? It's difficult because you talk to some, they give one view, you talk to others, they give another view. Are they going to engage in the process? Aren't they going to engage in the process? It is so up in the air. Is that the right way for the process to be rolled out? And I think from a public perspective, you know, a lot of people have a view on Legislative Council and the process. Should we be listening more to whether there should be change to that process? Probably. And should it be reviewed? There's never any harm in a review. Listen to what people say, whether it should be changed, what the positives are, what the negatives are. So, yeah, I don't feel I can comment on the 24 votes, but I feel I can comment on the process. Is probably not as clear cut as everybody would probably like to see.
And of course, a lot of people would say, "Oh, well, there they are, navel gazing again." When we ever discuss constitutional reform, is constitutional reform just a kind of an unnecessary luxury, or is actually getting the system fit for purpose a little bit more important than that?
No, I think you should have a fit for purpose system because society evolves, things change, mindsets change. When I was a teacher, it was really insightful to spend time with the age range of from 16 to 24-year-olds predominantly, and understand their viewpoints and how they see things differently. And, you know, through my own lens, I'm in my 50s, I see it differently. I've got 4 teenage children in the house now. They see things differently. So we have to constantly review where we're at and whether things are fit for purpose. Trying to get my children, trying to get the students to read newspapers, non-start. I would ask weekly, who reads the newspaper? Are you keeping up to speed with what's going on in the world, what's going on locally? They don't read the newspapers. Put it on TikTok, they'll see it, they'll engage with it. So processes have to be reviewed all the time. Constitutional processes. Are we reaching the electorate? Are we reaching the people of the Isle of Man with the messaging that we need to reach? So you do need to reform and review and reform constantly because society changes and evolves. During your time then as I don't know what equality advisor. Were there any particular examples of the relationship between government and Tynwald that you thought, yes, that works really well, or perhaps other areas where maybe you thought, gosh, if only they could do such and such, it would be so much simpler? Not specifically, Phil. I think because I was always bringing particular items to the agenda, we would have a set purpose as to what we were going to achieve. We may be bringing some regulations in or laying things before Tynwald, and so I think the processes weren't necessarily particularly contentious that we were delivering. Found that we had very good engagement. We would often spend time engaging with the politicians before we delivered something so that they were very clear about what it was we were going to deliver and they could digest it. I think particularly with the Equality Act, I think it's something like 243 pages long. It's a significant piece of legislation. In fact, when it came through the branches, which was before my time, a lot of the Hansard referred to the fact that this was such a significant piece of legislation and how should this be managed and should we break this down into sections, and I think at one time it was coming up to the end of an administration and the start of a new one, and it was quite important not to sort of have a break in that debate. So the different processes, I've been quite privileged in my personal engagement has been quite effective when I've had to engage on the political interface. So I wouldn't be able to make any comment that I've had a negative experience.
We've heard this week from Nicola Sturgeon about the incredible and immense pressure of being constantly in the public eye and a leading figure in public life. That enormous pressure that's brought to bear upon the person in that position. Are you ready for this?
Yes, this was something that I gave deep consideration to. So being in the public eye, subject to public scrutiny, it was one of the questions that I asked of several members, how they felt that impacted on their lives, on their family lives, because I have a family. It's very important to me and to my family that this works. So I have asked that question. It is a difficult one. I think I do use social media, but at the same time, there's plenty of people who will use social media in a negative way, and I think it's making sure that you don't get yourself dragged down into that negative zone and that you use social media for a positive purpose to achieve positive outcomes. So, yeah, it's a difficult thing. It's hard. I think that's the biggest barrier, putting yourself up for election, is knowing that you're going to be scrutinised publicly. But the way I'm viewing it is it's something I've wanted to do. Whatever the outcome, this will have been a positive journey. In fact, already I've learned quite a lot from it. I've learned different viewpoints again. I'm seeing things through different perspectives. I'm understanding more about processes. So all of that lends itself to more experience, more knowledge, and I'm sure all of it will be useful in the future, whatever the outcome.
So when you are going round touting your wares to the various Keys members, what are you saying to them? How are you selling yourself? I mean, we've just got a few minutes left now.
Well, I've asked them what their expectation is of Legislative Council. How does it work for them? Quite a lot will ask you whether or not about joining departments, whether you should do that, whether you should not do that.
And should you?
I take a view that if you are in a department, you will see the development of policy. You will see the development of the legislation. It will give you a much greater understanding of the legislation, and I think that will assist the process by the time it comes through to the branches. So I do think there is value in being involved in departmental work.
And what of your winning arguments would you say are hitting home best with the audience?
I think it's because I've had quite a lot of interaction with the political interface. I think it's well recognised that I bring the equality dimension to the table as well as my legislative skill set. So as a collaborator, I'm a very strong people person. I like to engage with people. So I think those skills are quite well recognised with quite a number of members already. But there are other members who I am still yet to engage with. To share some of those experiences, because certainly some of the newer politicians wouldn't have had any engagement with me, so there's still work to be done.
And in terms of a legacy, assuming that you were successful, what would you hope to be remembered for in 5 years' time?
That I have made a solid contribution to public life, that I can develop legislation that is fit for purpose, that is in plain English, that meets the intended policy outcomes, and also addresses inequalities.
Are you getting any feel from the Keys that there is a collective view about what they're looking for?
No, not really. I mean, there are some similarities in their views, but I think one of the key things that I am picking up is that it's important to get the legislation moving and through. The legislative programme is significant in the Island Plan, and everybody, depending on the departments that they may be working with, has got an agenda to bring that through. So it's the efficiency of the process that is really important to a lot of people. and collaborative engagement.
That was LegCo wannabe Dawn Kinnish. Conor Keenan stood for LegCo in the election which took place following Jane Poole Wilson and Kate Lord-Brennan's election to the House of Keys. So what has motivated him to stand again?
Hi Phil, second attempt. I had a go about 15 months ago now, November 2021, but I was unfortunately unsuccessful. I've put myself forward again, based a lot on kind of feedback I had from members last time when they spoke to me. It's given me enough encouragement to have another go. I've dedicated the last year to trying to improve my suitability as well. I've done lots of kind of specific training courses. I know there's kind of no political qualifications as such, but I've done a little bit of scrutiny specific training with some bodies in England. So I feel that's put me in good stead. And similar to last time, really, I feel like I offer a unique perspective, to be honest, to Legislative Council. I'm clinging on to my youth as we speak now, so I feel like I can bring a different viewpoint to council and more widely to Tynwald as well.
And for those who don't know much about your background, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you are.
Yeah, so I was born on the island. My father's Irish and my mother's Manx. Was initially brought up in Crosby, so I spent a lot of time in Crosby and Round. Went to QE2. Went to university, the kind of usual route, come back. Started working for Barclays when I first returned to the island. Didn't really float my boat, to be honest, so moved around a little bit, did a little bit of government work with Department of Infrastructure, road safety team, and then when I was 24, 25, I can't remember now, I went and did me teacher training after a little spell at Castle Rushen as a teaching assistant. So I've been teaching up in Ramsey for the last, I think it's 9 years now, I think.
Very good. And in terms of those experiences, what has motivated you to think, actually, I need to be in the Legislative Council? You know, is there something particular that's happened that makes you think that? Yes,
I mean, obviously the council itself is more there for that kind of scrutiny, transparency, accountability role. Some of the various positions I've had within teaching, so that my career's kind of gone down a bit of a governance and administrative route. So I've just recently been re-elected as a school governor, for example. I was previously president of the National Education Union as well. So for me, it just feels like more of a natural fit. As I say, with some of the experiences I've had career-wise, it's more gone down that kind of governance administrative route, which I think aligns itself more with kind of the roles, responsibilities and duties of LegCo.
It's been said about LegCo that it's, the part of the problem I think people like me have as commentators is we're not entirely clear what LegCo's for these days. But it has been said in the past that it should have or represent some sort of aldermanic bench with people who've lived fairly long lives with lots of experiences to be in there. I presume that you would argue otherwise.
Yeah, I would. As I say, for me, obviously we had the Vying report in the kind of recent past. One of the main recommendations obviously coming out was kind of increased breadth of diversity. That kind of diversity of thought is something I think that I can definitely offer. As I say, with the sort of unique perspective that I feel I could bring. And
I suppose the other obvious question that people will ask is, well, you're relatively young. Why would you not think about going for the House of Keys? Because you if you wish to change the world, the chances are you've got better chance, I suppose, in the House of Keys than you would in LegCo.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously the big question, or certainly the one I've had in kind of both attempts I've had at it is kind of why not the Keys route. For me, they're two really, really distinct roles, and just linking back to your previous question there in terms of people not perhaps knowing exactly what it's about, that was something I definitely picked up the last time round, and even now there is a lot of, I think, education that can be done around the role of Legislative Council, what it does. So for me, in terms of why not for Keys, as I say, Keys is your real main policy driver. For me, in my experiences, I quite often agree with most policies, to be honest. It's not that I want to come in and revolutionise things. It's just that kind of tweaking element. So I almost, as I say, with where I am on the front line, if you like, so to speak, I'm not a senior position or anything. I feel like I represent, I feel like I see those inaccuracies, if you like, in legislation in practice, and I feel that I could bring that perspective just to make sure that the legislation is exactly representing the policy that the policy drivers want to implement.
And obviously, the Legislative Council, the work of the Legislative Council is very much about scrutinising legislation, and generally, because Keys has supremacy in these matters, anything that's discussed in LegCo or decided on in LegCo, if it's different to what Keys had originally intended, it has to go back to Keys for their subsequent approval or rejection. So that, I think that element of the relationship is clear. But when you go into Tynwald, you are an equal member. In fact, it could be argued you have a stronger vote than Keys, certainly for the initial vote in Tynwald. And Tynwald is about debating national policy and discussing things like the budget. So what you're saying in terms of the legislative scrutiny is fine, but you are still a national politician, aren't you?
Yeah, that's right. As I say, that was something that I tried to emphasise last time round, is I really do understand this role. I understand the position it is. I understand the roles and responsibilities that come with it. I understand the discrete differences between this and a House of Keys position. But you're quite right to highlight that in terms of it's looked at. LegCo obviously is a scrutinising body, but crucially you are there as a voting member, a contributing member of Tynwald, potentially a committee member as well in terms of the wider parliamentary stuff. And I think that should be emphasised actually a little bit more to the public as well. In terms of LegCo going forward, I would like to see that evolve a little bit. I mean, I think members of the Legislative Council, there's no reason why they can't be made to justify their votes, their contributions in Tynwald. As I say, I know there's not necessarily the public vote there, but they're still on Hansard with what they vote. They're still on Hansard with what they say. So they certainly should feel comfortable, any member of Legislative Council, to justify that position or that stance that they take within Tynwald. Should
members of the Legislative Council be voted in by the public?
It's a tricky one. I personally have no problem with this. Obviously, this is another big one that comes up, and it certainly come up the last time round. If this was a public election, I would still be sat here now in front of you. It's the position that I feel that I am or would be good at. So if this was a publicly elected position, I'd still be sat here now. There are nuanced problems, I think, that come with it being publicly elected. Some people obviously talk about an island-wide mandate. That's not something I subscribe to. I don't believe that at all, because, as I say, I think the mandate's for a totally different position. I don't have any problems with it being publicly elected. I can see pros with it being publicly elected. I can see pros with it being indirectly elected as well. Something I mentioned last time was perhaps, is there any scope to perhaps have some sort of hybrid model? For example, like the Irish Senate. I know there's various ways of getting into that. I know that would get a little bit tricky if someone was to leave and a potential what's effectively a by-election. But that's certainly something I think there's the scope to investigate as to whether there is maybe a hybrid model, to see does it work, and then ultimately people might make their mind up from there as to whether public election is the way forward.
So in Ireland, for example, universities can vote or elect a particular professor or doctor or whoever it may be to represent academia. Is it that sort of thing that you're thinking about?
That's only obviously a near example of it. I don't think it would need to be as prescriptive as that over here, to be honest. It's just that there would be perhaps out of the 4 positions up for grabs, 2 indirectly elected, 2 public elected. As I say, it's a hypothetical at the minute, but I think it's something that potentially could be looked at to assess whether it's viable. crucially to assess whether it's actually, with all due respect, enough interest to it, in terms of the education of things. It'd be interesting to see if there was a public ballot what the turnout on it would be for a member for Legislative Council as well. But yeah, as I say, the Irish example is just one that I think is on our doorstep. But for me, initially, I don't think it would need to be as prescriptive as saying it would need to be an academic or somebody from a certain field.
How would you respond to people who will say, as they do, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, and just crack on and carry on with what we've got?
In terms of the election process, I'd be fine with that as well. As I say, I can see pros to it being elected in the way it is now, in that the Keys members can look round and see, well, we've got strengths and weaknesses in certain areas of knowledge bases and certain areas of other things, and they actually feel that they're in a stronger position to pick a lot from a lineup of people that might fit the gaps in the kind of wider Tynwald family, if you like. So, as I say, for me, I'm quite comfortable with it either way or the other. I don't have particularly strong feelings that it should be publicly elected, but equally, I'm not sat here saying it shouldn't be publicly elected either. Recognising
that part of your role, at least, will be to be a national politician and have views on a range of different policies and politics. What actually motivates you politically? What floats your political boat?
As I say, I obviously have my own political opinions on various issues island-wide and more globally. I don't necessarily think LegCo is actually a position for me to go and try and promote those. Obviously, as I say, if I felt that strongly about them, it would be the Keys route or perhaps local authority route that I should be going down. So I have my own views on various things. I like to think I'm quite centrist on issues. I kind of look at issues as they arise, sort of thing, quite pragmatically, I think, and then would make a decision one way or the other. And as I say, I think that kind of balance and that objectivity that I look at and perhaps bring would again be something that would be useful to LegCo. What do you think makes for good legislative scrutiny? I think assessment of what is in legislation, also what isn't in legislation, making sure that, as I say, the legislation fits the policy that's behind it, making sure that there's no kind of unintended consequences or something that's been overlooked or anything like that, as I say, that might be a problem later down the line. One of the things that was mentioned to me last time actually was perhaps the wording of legislation. Obviously, it has to be underpinned with legal frameworks and legal language. Perhaps is there some sort of way that we could make the legislation a little bit more applicable to the average man on the street as well? That'd be perhaps something to look at. I'm not sure the average man on the street, or woman for that matter, would thank you for being able to understand legislation any better. In a way, that's why we elect people to LegCo and Keys. But I suppose the other obvious question that many people, many MHKs will be interested to know your answer is, should members of the Legislative Council serve in government departments? Again, yeah, you're right. As I say, it's always the big one that comes up, and it was one that was mentioned to me last time. I don't sit here desperate to get into a department. Sorry. For me, I think once you've got the kind of Tynwald lineup established, if you like, with its Keys members and Legislative Council members, for me it would be about getting the best skill sets across. If that involves a Legislative Council member being on the department, I wouldn't have an issue with it. But obviously, what is really important in there is that they're not having dictating on any policy matters at all. It is quite right that the ultimate policy should be determined by the publicly elected members within the department. So I don't, again, quite sort of centrist on the issue. I think there's potential. I wouldn't think every Legislative Council member would be suited to a department, but I think there is perhaps some scope for some of them. Obviously, as a Legislative Council member, you're there as a parliamentarian as well. So it might be that it doesn't have to be a government department. There could also be some other kind of parliamentary roles that might be more suited. It's
fair to say, maybe it's not fair to say, but I'm going to say it anyway. I think you probably would make an excellent member of a department, or indeed government minister, because your answers so far very much seem to be on the one hand and yet on the other. So you're very balanced, but perhaps people listening in might still be saying, yeah, but what does he actually believe in? What motivates him? Because politics, any sort of politics, whether you're in the Keys or indeed in LegCo, tends to be it takes over your life, and you have to be pretty much full on and intensive about the way you go about your work. Effectively, you're going to be doing this for 5 years, so you'll need some driving force, some motivation to actually keep up with the enormous pressures that you'll be facing.
Yeah, as I say, it would depend on a specific issue. If I was to be questioned on a specific issue, I could let you know my thoughts one way or the other. But as I say, I'm just kind of quite centrist in nature. It would all depend on what the issue was. Some people would say I'd be left-leaning, some people would say I'd be right-leaning. It would all just be dependent on the issue. But as I say, I think that's actually a strength in Legislative Council. I think that's what I would bring, is that kind of objective rigour. Obviously, in Keys at the minute, we've got, if you take Crogger, for example, you've got polar opposite opinions on the House there. You're never going to get a unanimous decision one way or the other. And I think a strength of Legislative Council and a strength that I would bring is, as I say, I can step back from the kind of politicalness, if you like, from that, look at both sides of the argument from an objective position, and then ultimately vote and contribute as I seen fit. So as I say, I think that objectivity is actually a strength of a Legislative Council member. You're there to make sure that things are right and things work well. You're not there to perhaps meet a manifesto commitment. You're not there to perhaps toe the departmental or government line if you're a Coman member or a departmental member. So I actually think that kind of objectivity and that centrist idea is something that's actually a strength of a LegCo member.
In terms of the training that you've undertaken over the course of the last 12 to 18 months, tell us a little bit more about what you've done there.
Yeah, so as I say, it's something that after the last election, I thought I'm going to have to do something if I want to give this another go. I was very disappointed last time not to get in, and it might be that it was actually a benefit because it really has focused my mind. So again, just to say, I know there's no kind of political qualification. I don't sit here as kind of bragging like that as such. But I did some work with something called the Local Government Information Unit, who do a lot of work with UK councils, UK county councils, UK city councils. So I did some question skills for scrutiny, work with those guys. And then I did a few little seminars with someone called the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny as well. I've also done a few little other bits and pieces just around some work-related stuff as well, which again kind of underpin that administration element, if you like, as well.
And what would you say the key elements were that you've learned over the recent past? Finding out information, actually. It's one thing getting the information that you're told, but it's another thing getting the information that you need, for example. So I feel in a stronger place to try and drill down that, be it if it was needing to be a question in Tynwald, if it was needing to be a bit of committee work or whatever it might be. So I think, yeah, definitely the skills of getting the answers that you need, really. And I suppose another obvious question that many people would be interested to know the answer to is, if you are elected, you'll be there for 5 years. So what's going to be different because Conor Keenan is a member of the Legislative Council as opposed to any of the others that may wish to stand? Yeah, I feel that the position. I think there's a real area that the positions within LegCo, be it whoever the members are, I think they can evolve. But I also would see myself evolving in that. As I say, the last time round when I was unsuccessful, it was only for a short term. This time, with a 5-year term, I could really see myself kind of getting in and evolving in the position, if you like. I think perhaps just linking back to what I mentioned there before, maybe that kind of public accountability. I think
I think that could be improved. That's something I'm quite comfortable with. As I say, I'm currently a teacher, so island-wide, you'll go out, you'll see somebody you know that they'll want to question you. Perhaps they'll, and I'm kind of comfortable with that public element. And as I say, I think that the public should and perhaps want to know what Legislative Council's decisions are, what their thought processes are, what their votes are. So for me, it would be almost like an evolution in terms of the information that perhaps Legislative Council can get out. That would be how I see things perhaps evolving, and certainly how I feel I could evolve along with it.
Some might argue, and that there are different variants of this argument, that perhaps over the course of the last 5 years or so, Legislative Council seems to be hiding itself behind a bush. So it's much less eager to be in the public eye, and indeed it's also reasonably fair to say that there may be many people on the Isle of Man who haven't got any idea who their members of the Legislative Council are. Do you think that style of or that approach is the right approach, that LegCo should be subservient and take that sort of back seat compared with Keys, or would you be the sort of member of LegCo that would want to get out and explain yourself to the public on a reasonably regular basis?
I think the idea that it being an explanation is what it is. As I say, it certainly shouldn't be that LegCo members should be out shouting from the rafters what their ideas are, explaining what it is. But as I say, I think there's some scope for just that visibility to be improved, potentially. As I say, or as you just alluded to there, I think if you ask most people on the street, they could probably tell you who their MHKs were. They could probably tell you who most ministers were. But I think if you ask them who was their local, or who was any member of Legislative Council, that they perhaps might struggle. In terms of being subservient, it should be that it's a secondary function to the main policy driving chamber, which is Keys. So they certainly shouldn't be competing for time on Manx Radio to interview with you, for example. But in terms of accessibility, I think that's something that I would certainly be open to. But it certainly shouldn't be that they would compete, I don't think, with those publicly elected members, but certainly perhaps an increased visibility. But I think we have seen that, to be honest. Certainly with some members lately that are very passionate about certain issues. So I think that it is changing slightly. Some people will say perhaps that they should be in the background. I think the overarching thing for me, for any Legislative Council debate, is if you were to ask 100 people, you'd almost get 100 different replies on what LegCo is, what LegCo does, what LegCo should do. It's kind of, no matter what iteration it's in, it's never going to be all things to all people.
Okay, we've got to the vote. Members of the House of Keys all sitting around ready to vote, and several of them are undecided. You and maybe one other of the candidates that they're not quite sure who will they go for. So what would you think? What would you say to them? The one reason why you would make the better candidate?
The one reason why I'd make the better candidate is because I really do understand the position. I understand its position within Tynwald. I understand the specifics of the role. And as I say, I feel like I've got a skill set which is transferable across the kind of various aspects that's needed within Tynwald, coupled with the background and the perspective that I would bring, coupled with the sort of industry-specific work, if you like, that I've done in the last year or so, I think would make me a really good candidate. That
was LegCo candidate Conor Keenan. So what do you think? Is he up to the task? Will anything change if he gets elected? And what about Dawn Kinnish? Is she capable of helping steer us through the troubled waters that undoubtedly lie ahead? There's an open opportunity for all candidates to appear on Agenda and to tell us what they stand for. Don't forget, this programme is available as a podcast on Manx Radio's website. For now, though, I'm Phil Gorn, Goramayo. Thanks for listening.